But let's get into our first topic here. And the first one's a big one. We got a pretty huge deal here with that Netflix. I don't know who got the better end of this deal. I'm kind of leaning to. I really don't know. I think it's a great deal for both. Netflix has essentially bought exclusive streaming rights for Sony properties here. So they paid, I believe it was about $1 billion for the next 4 years to have exclusive rights to all of Sony's properties. So that's Spider-Man, like Jumanji. If they keep making Bad Boys, as you see here, we'll have that. But those are just some of the bigger ones. And I think this is, like I said, I'd be curious to know which one you think got the better deal out here. Because this is also, like I forgot too, like Morbius, Uncharted's coming out. So all those, like Sony's kind of going full steam ahead with, they made the whole new production development team exclusively for their video game properties, because obviously Sony has a ton of very successful video games, and they're actually going to be making those into movies. They made their own film division to actually focus on the video game adaptations, and they're starting with Uncharted. But this is a huge deal, and not just because all the movies get to go on Netflix, but on Sony's end, they got paid $1 billion off the top by Netflix just for the exclusive rights for their titles, and then Sony still gets paid out per movie by Netflix. So it's a pretty insane deal on Sony's. I almost think Sony worked out. They kind of got the better end of this because Sony is in like a very unique position in this streaming wars climate, because you have Universal with Peacock, and then you have Paramount with Paramount Plus. Warner has HBO Max. All these companies have made their own streaming services. Disney with Disney Plus, to name another one. And so all of their properties are just going straight to their streaming services. But that left Sony in a position of, do they spin up their own, dump billions of dollars into making their own streaming service? Or do they just, since they're kind of the odd man out right now, like arguably one of the biggest and better studios out there too. They have some very good properties, just like I named a few earlier. They're just in a position where they could just still keep licensing off their properties now. That's essentially what they did. They went and they talked to all of the studios out there. Like Disney put a bid in, like everybody, Peacock, Universal. They sat down with everyone. Netflix gave them the best deal, obviously, because it's a pretty killer deal. And they went with that. So, John, what do you think about this? Who do you think got the better end of this deal here? Because I think on the opposite side of the coin, Netflix being kind of like, Netflix isn't going to go anywhere. Obviously, they've been the big boy on the block for the longest time here. They were the first streaming company out of the gate. Really, they have the most subscribers still to this day. But the one thing they've always been lacking was that prime original content. Like they've always been consistent with putting out like Netflix originals, but they don't have like, aside from Stranger Things, they never really had anything that was like a global phenomenon. Like they've had some good stuff come out like in the later years with like Witcher and all these things, but that was them acquiring rights to something. It wasn't something they developed, like technically speaking. But so this is huge for them too in that regard. Just for the next 4 years, they're going to have this massive library of Sony titles there. So, what are your thoughts on this, though?
I was actually, I mean, when we talked about going over this today, I thought it was a very good deal for both sides. Obviously, I think that Sony my initial thoughts were that Sony is making a really smart move here. As we saw back in the 90s and early 2000s with all the tech companies and startups, like the hot new trendy thing to do doesn't always work out for everybody. Well, the hot new trendy thing to do right now in entertainment is start your own streaming service and stream as much content as you can on it. But we've talked about it before, like all those people who were cord cutters, 5, 10 years ago, are now looking at it and going, well, wait a minute, where's all the savings? Like, yeah, I used to be able to cut out my cable bill and stream with Netflix and get almost just as much content, but now you've got, 37 different streaming services out there to subscribe to. You're actually end up paying more to get access to all the different things you need. So I think there's going to be a tipping point with the streaming wars at some point. people are going to say, hey, enough's enough. I don't have, you know, 10, $15 a month for 10 different services. I'm back to paying as much, if not more than I was when I had like my cable plans and stuff. So in that respect, I think Sony's being smart about it. One of the things I thought when you were going over what you were going over is I'm actually a little worried just because personally I love the MCU so much, and I love the fact that Marvel has all of their characters right now, including Spider-Man. This deal, however, sends one of those major MCU characters, Spider-Man, over to Netflix for streaming. So when you go to watch the MCU movies on Disney Plus, you're gonna miss out on, at this point, what is it? 5%, 3, 4, 5% of the MCU, because the Spider-Man movies aren't going to be available there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, not the worst thing in the world. I mean, they don't make them, you have to see them to understand the other movies, but it's a nice little tie-in, and there are things that are important from them um that add more to the MC, add more depth and characters to the MCU. And I also just wonder if Disney's going to look at this deal and say, you know what, Sony, you know what, fine, we're done. We're not going to re-up any future contracts, and we're gonna reach a point where this is going to contribute to the MCU losing Spider-Man, or a version of Spider-Man in it, which would be disappointing. Now I'm going way off the reservation with this whole talk with that, but I'm just, looking down the line and seeing what the ramifications of this could be. But as far as the deal itself, like I said, I think Sony's making a smart move, because I don't think that's the industry can sustain as many streaming services as there are. I think at some point there is going to be a tipping point, and some of these companies just aren't going to make it. Um, so, and then obviously Netflix is, securing their long term. Um, well, at least I mean 4 years. It's relatively long term um, content drought that they were facing. So
Well, yeah, and two, you brought up something else too, which is I think this in the end speaks to like Sony's kind of longer game here. It was like it kind of indicates that they've decided that they're not going to jump on that train. You know, they're
yeah,
not going to make their own streaming service and stuff. Because you said that it's not movie related, but it is like video games. Like I kind of mentioned, are a big part of Sony's production and revenue in
yeah,
general. And you said that was it MLB The Show?
yeah,
Like that's been an exclusive game
on
for
PlayStation.
Sony, and apparently the a Sony development team still is making the game, but they've now like essentially licensed it to like Microsoft, and I guess who even Nintendo I guess could get it at some point at this point.
Sure.
So like even with that, it kind of just shows that it's not exactly the same. It's a different division of, Sony, but it still kind of indicates that it's like they're in the same position as the film company or the film division right now. It's like they're producing content and just licensing it out. Like that's kind of like
Yeah.
what their end game is kind of looking at, which is I think it's smart because like you said, I really don't see every one of these streaming services working. Like I wouldn't be surprised if like even though like Peacock and Paramount, they have a good library of titles. Like Peacock has, I mean, they have all of Universal stuff's under there, then all of NBC stuff is under there. So I mean, you got The Office, you got Fast and the Furious, there's a ton of stuff that Universal has. So like Peacock, even though it has the worst name of all of them, like the absolute worst name of all the streaming services, it's not really that bad of a service. And then Paramount, they also have they have good stuff. They have Star Trek, they have the Mission Impossible stuff. Like they have good stuff too. But in the end, well, then CBS as well, obviously. So like they
Yeah.
have a ton of television and movie stuff. But like Paramount, of all the film, production studios, they've been hurting the most in the last 10 years because they haven't had big blockbuster titles like everyone else has. Like I remember I forget what the exact number is, but like Paramount like was at the bottom like a year or two ago of like movie studio like revenue in the entire year. It was a very small amount, like $300 million or something was like
Yeah.
all they made. And in a world where Disney made like over 8 billion, like Paramount was sitting with like a cool $300 million. Like they haven't been doing good, so it's like how long is it gonna be until, it's like CBS All Access, for instance, that was what Paramount Plus was before. It didn't really take off at all.
Yeah.
Like, they made all these Star Trek shows, and they were hoping that would get some people in, but, I mean, they already had to rebrand to Paramount Plus.
Well,
Mm.
and the CBS All Access and Paramount stuff specifically too, it's really it's one of these odd situations where people associate certain shows and certain things with certain channels, but those channels don't necessarily produce those shows. So one of CBS's biggest hits from the past decade was The Big Bang Theory. Well, if you get Paramount Plus, you don't get access to The Big Bang Theory because the show was actually produced by Warner Brothers,
Mhm.
so it's over on HBO Max.
Right.
So even having CBS, like it's nice in theory, and there are definitely some CBS produced shows that people will sign up for, but it doesn't just because you have CBS or Paramount Plus doesn't mean you get access to what you traditionally think of as all the CBS shows because of the way television studios and production companies have sold the rights and their shows off to different channels over the years.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see because, like, of all of them, I could see that one probably being the first one to just kind of, like, call it quits
Yeah,
because not any, like, thing bad about them. Like I said, they got plenty of good stuff, but it's just, is it enough to make you sign up for it? You know what I mean? It's like I always say with, like, Disney Plus, like, the fact that it's pretty impressive the fact that they were able to get, they're the number 2 streaming service at this point, but they were able to do that with just one show. Like,
yeah,
Mandalorian was their only premium new content available, and the rest was just all catalog stuff. And that alone allowed them to become the second most subscribed to streaming service. As I just don't see that happening with Peacock or Paramount Plus or whatever. They don't have that same pull, unfortunately.
yeah.
So, like, I could totally see, like, at one day, maybe Netflix is just like, hey, Paramount, like, I wouldn't be surprised one of these days too if Netflix actually buys one of those, like, buys a Paramount kind of thing.
A
Not just,
production studio.
yeah,
Yeah,
like, buy, like, because that's really one thing that they are missing because they are their own production studio, yeah, but I could totally see them at some point in the future, especially the way they've been throwing money around, like with, at Ryan Johnson in particular. That's another thing too, like this, I'm wondering what this is actually gonna do, like, with Netflix being in the position they're in where they've just been kind of throwing money around, like with the Ryan Johnson thing in particular, and even with this, it's setting an interesting precedent because, like, what if someone like what if Steven Spielberg is trying to get a movie made? This is Steven F. and Spielberg, like arguably the greatest filmmaker living right now. What if he goes and is trying to get a movie made and no one wants to give him the money to make it? And then, like, maybe Netflix is like, "Oh, we'll give you, like, X amount to do it," but it's not like, he doesn't think it's, enough. It's not what he's asking for, and then he'll call back to, like, "Well, you gave Ryan Johnson $100 million off the top."
yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? So it's like, it actually, like, can set almost a dangerous precedent because now, like, other people are gonna be like,
They
"What do
set a
you get?"
market.
Yeah.
They set what the market price is on things, and other people are going to be able to say, "Look, I have a bigger draw than Ryan
Yeah,
Johnson."
it's like, so you're
So
telling me, like, Steven Spielberg, me, that I'm not worth as much as Ryan Johnson? Like, it's
yeah,
essentially like the precedent they're stating, and same with this $1 billion deal for Sony. If someone else came to them, it's gonna be the same way, if they're not, so it's interesting. I'm curious to see where if that's gonna pan out, if it's gonna have any long-term ramifications, but
yeah,
we'll just have to see. In the end, I think this is a great deal for Sony. It's a great deal for Netflix. I'm curious to see where it goes in the future, though,
yeah.
for sure. So, but the question is, guys, what do you think about this? Was it surprising to you? And who do you think got the better end of this deal? Was it Netflix or was it Sony? Let us know what you think down in the comments section below.